speakers from first day of training demonstrated from the basic to advanced operations of the spectrophotometry and others drug discovery tools. And today is the last day of our training program, and we have an exclusive session on nuclear magnetic resonance spectroscopy. So I would like to invite Dr. Kiran Jathar. She is Associate Professor and Vice Principal, RD National College, Bandra, Mumbai, India. And she is recognized research guide in the subject of and member board of studies in University of Mumbai. She has coordinated a number of conferences in collaboration with Green Chemistry Foundation, and she has been awarded by many national and international awards like International Women Achiever Award at Dubai by BioLeak and 100 Most Impactful Global Leader for Health Care Award. So I would like to welcome Dr. Kiran ma'am for your lecture. You need to unmute, ma'am.
Yeah, thank you, Pooja. I would first of all thank Prizar and Preeti for inviting me today for this lecture. NMR, as we all know, is a very important tool for analytical chemistry as well as analysis. Today, it has become very important in various fields of life, and I'm going to present today HNMR, that is proton NMR, because that is the basic of NMR theory. So I'll share my screen and let us go into. Can you see my screen?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So my topic for today is NMR spectroscopy and its applications. It is divided into instrumentation, history, HNMR principles and theory, types of NMR, and applications of NMR. So starting with the introduction, what is nuclear magnetic resonance or magnetic resonance spectroscopy? It is a spectroscopic technique to observe local magnetic field around atomic nuclei. It is a spectroscopic technique which uses a radio frequency between 60 to 900 megahertz per nucleus of the atoms, and in this method it is the only method for which a complete analysis and interpretation of the entire spectrum is normally expected. The principle of NMR is that there are many nuclei which has a spin, and all nuclei are electrically charged. Therefore, if they are placed in an external magnetic field, then they will transfer and the energy transfer is possible. Then they will go from a base energy level to a higher energy level, generally a single energy gap. The energy transfer takes place at a wavelength that corresponds to radio frequencies, and when the spin returns to its base level, energy is emitted and the same frequency is then registered as a NMR spectra. The signal that matches this transfer is measured in many ways, and it is processed in order to yield a NMR spectra for the nuclear concerned. And the plot of frequency on x-axis and intensity on y-axis gives a NMR spectra. Let's go to the instrumentation. Components of NMR spectrophotometer. Now, this is a very big instrument. It's a very huge instrument. Though now there are tabletop NMRs which have come, but are not easily available to at least the teaching faculty or the academics. Industry does have them, but these are the basic components in an NMR spectrophotometer. There an intense, homogeneous and stable magnetic field a probe which enables the coil used to excite and detect the signals to be placed close to the sample, a RF transmitter to deliver high power pulses, a sensitive receiver to amplify the NMR signals, a detector to convert the NMR signals into a form which can be stored in the computer memory, a pulse programmer to produce precisely time pulses and delays, a computer to control everything and process the data. So now let us go and see, look into each part of the spectrophotometer. This is a block diagram. So these are the different parts of the spectrophotometer which are required. You need magnets. So these are the magnets, the powerful magnets which are required. These are the magnets. These are the sweep coils or the shim coils, which as we call them. This is the radio frequency transmitter. This is a radio frequency receiver and amplifier, and there is control console and recorder. So this is a block diagram of a spectrophotometer, which we can usually see. Now the magnets, there are two types of magnets in a NMR spectrophotometer. One is a superconducting magnet and the second is the shim coils. The magnets must be strong, stable, and must produce a homogeneous magnetic field. That is, the field should not vary in strength and direction from point to point over the space occupied by the sample. And the range is somewhere from 60 megahertz, that is 1.4 Teslas, to 900 megahertz, that is 21 Teslas. So you have a variety of NMRs available in the market. More the strength of the magnet, more costly is the instrument. Now, there are two types of magnets, as I told you, conducting magnet and the shim coil. So let us see what are the superconducting magnets. The superconducting magnets, they are made up of niobium and tin, or of antimony and tin wires, antimony and titanium wires. These superconducting magnets are submerged in helium to provide sufficient cooling. The magnet and the liquid helium reservoirs are encased in a liquid reservoir. Now, why they are encased? Because helium is very costly. So we don't want to lose the helium, and therefore they are encased in a nitrogen reservoir. This is to decrease the loss of more expensive liquid helium. And then a sample probe is put into the bore along with a set of shim coils. So if you look at the figure, you can easily see. Now, see, this is the bore in which the sample is probed. This is a helium, liquid helium. In the liquid helium reservoir is encased in a liquid nitrogen reservoir, which is placed in vacuum. So all this around this is vacuum. And then you have the strong magnets. You have strong magnets here. These are the towers, helium ports and everything. So this instrument itself, this magnet itself is very huge, and it requires a lot of space to keep. These are the shim coils. If you see, there's a cross section of the previous figure. And if you see this, so you have this probe or NMR probe. Next to the probe, you can see the magnet shim assembly. What are shim coils? These are basically devices which are used to bring homogeneity of a magnetic field, because we need a homogeneous magnetic field when the sample is placed in the sample tube or in the probe. And shimming is a process that is carried out to correct any inhomogeneity in the applied magnetic field during a nuclear magnetic resonance experiment. So this is a cross section, as I told you, of the previous figure. This is a sample holder. The sample holder is usually made up of borosilicate glass or Pyrex glass, and is available in 7 and 8 inches length, a 5 millimeter tube outer diameter, and it is transparent to RF radiations, durable and chemically inert. There are other tubes which are available in the market, which have a diameter of 3 millimeter and 10 millimeter also, these are also available. These are some of the sample holders, pictures of some of the sample holders, different types which are there. This is a probe. And what exactly is a probe? Probe is a very important. The probe is something in which you put the sample holder, and the NMR probe is the core element where the magnetic field, the radio frequency, and the sample interacts with each other. It contains an R turbine to spin the sample while the sample is collected, used to excite and detect the magnetization in radio frequency of samples. The most essential component is the RF transmitting and the receiving coil. An optimized probe configuration for the application will guarantee optimal performance. That is, different customized probes are required for different nuclei. So this is the probe in which the sample tube, this is a sample tube which is there, and this is the space. This is the space from where the RF signal, or it is also called as the NMR signal window, from where the RF signal is passed into the probe. There are RF generators and detectors. RF generator is an RF radiation is generated by a crystal oscillator. The output of the generator is mixed, amplified, and filtered to produce monochromatic RF radiations and delivered to the sample. The pulse might be a rectangular pulse because it is usually given at 90 degrees to the magnetic force, the magnet which is outside. NMR signal originates, what is an RF detector? The NMR signal which originates from the probe is detected by the digitalized receiver at regular intervals of time. These signals in the time domain are converted to frequency domains by application of Fourier transformer. Now, what do you mean by Fourier transformer? Basically, in NMR, because there are a number of protons which are there, and the protons absorb different amount of energy in different chemical environment. So what happens is when the signal is given out, it's a time domain signal, and the signal is all mixed signal of different protons. When it is passed mathematically, when mathematical equation of Fourier transform is applied to it, it gives you a very clear signal. You can see this. What is FID? FID is free induction decay. When the free induction decay, it is then passed through a Fourier transformer system to give you a split NMR or a NMR of this kind, which is shown in the figure. The spectrum is obtained only if it is transferred. Otherwise, we will get all fixed, mixed frequencies, and we will not be in a position to read the NMR. Now, how do you prepare a sample? Sample, if required, are degassed to remove oxygen and filtered to remove solid particles, because solid particles, if present, will interfere with, and the resolution of the spectra will not be very good. Oxygen also has to be removed, and that this is done by a process called as freeze pump thaw, where nitrogen is purged in it, and the empty space of the sample tube is filled with nitrogen. Oxygen is removed from it. The samples are usually liquid samples. If they are non-viscous liquid samples, they are run as is by placing about 0.5 ml of liquid in the NMR sample tube. If they are viscous liquids, then it can be mixed with suitable solvents. Generally, the concentration is between 2 to 10%. And if the solid samples are there, then they are dissolved in suitable solvents for analysis. And the typical sample size is 2 to 3 milligrams of solid is dissolved in around 0.5 ml of the solvent. Gas samples have very poor sensitivity, and they are not very good. They are concentrated by absorbing it into suitable liquid solvents. So what are the solvents which can be used? The solvents which can be used in NMR should be chemically inert to the sample and the sample holder, and has no NMR absorption spectra itself, or a very small, a simple spectra is to be shown. Easily recovered by techniques such as distillation, so that the sample can be recovered, because this is a non-destructive method. So it should be easily removable. The solvent should be easily removable. The best solvents are deuterated solvents like chloroform, because hydrogen, whatever we are studying is HNMR, and therefore the hydrogens, if present in the solvent, will interfere, and their peaks will also be seen, and therefore deuterated solvents like chloroform, deuterated water, dimethyl sulfoxide, that is where DMSO D6 as we call it, carbon disulfide, carbon tetrachloride, etc. can be used as solvents. Now we come to the historical development. It has been over 100 years that NMR, the first experience of nuclear magnetic moment was seen, or it was explained by fine line structures and atomic spectral lines in the year 1924. In 1930, nuclear magnetic moments were detected using by using Stern-Grelec experiments by Esterman, and in 1939, Rabi was the first to detect nuclear magnetic resonance phenomena, and he got a Nobel Prize for this. Purcell and Howard at Harvard reported nuclear resonance absorption in paraffin wax. So you can see in 1949, chemical shift phenomena was observed. 52 Nobel Prize in Physics was awarded to Purcell and Bloch. 1963, Ernst and Anderson first introduced the Fourier transform technique into NMR, and that was the time when everything was, when NMR came into use a lot after the Fourier transform. Before that, there was a lot of noise which was observed in the spectra. In the late 19s, a lot of advancement happened in NMR. Solid state NMR was revived due to the effort of Vogt and associates in MIT. Biological applications became possible due to introduction of superconducting magnets. NMR images was demonstrated. NMR, that means MRI imaging, which is there today, that was also demonstrated. In 1970, 2D NMR was introduced. In 80s, macromolecular structure determination in solution by NMR was achieved. In 1991, Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to Richard Ernst. Then 1990s, continual development of heteronuclear multidimensional NMR permits the determination of protein structures. MRI became a major and radiological tool and medical diagnosis. Then in 2002, Nobel Prize in Chemistry was awarded to Code. Similarly, so NMR, as we have seen, over a period of time has advanced and has now reached to nearly everything with every aspect of life. NMR is a versatile tool, and it has applications in wide variety of subjects in addition to its chemical and biomedical applications, including material and quantum computing. So these are the people who have received a Nobel Prize in different years working on NMR, the different aspects of NMR. So they are from versatile and different fields like physics. There are 3 people from physics, 2 from chemistry, medicine. So you can see the use of NMR in different fields, and therefore different people from different fields have received the Nobel Prize. Now we come to the basic of HNMR. I know it's very difficult to actually teach the topic, or take a lecture on this topic in 2 hours time, because it's a very vast topic. And the basic 2 types of NMR which are very common are the HNMR and the C13 NMR. The HNMR is also called as the proton NMR, and it's the most widely used method. Even the MRI uses the proton NMR principles. The C13 NMR is also good, but HNMR is better, and C13 is also very good. There are other NMRs which can be used, which we will be seeing a little later. So let's first see the theory of HNMR, because the theory for C13 is also very similar to HNMR. So it's also called, as I told you, it is also called as proton NMR. It's a chemical analysis technique. It is used to determine the type and number of hydrogen atoms in a molecule. Now, all of us know that hydrogen atom has 1 proton and 1 electron. 1 proton means it has got a spin of half, and therefore, and when a charged particle moves, it creates its own magnetic field. So a proton or a hydrogen atom is considered as a proton, which is considered as a proton, has its own magnetic field. An NMR spectrum is a plot of intensity of a peak against its chemical shift measured in parts per million. All nuclei with odd number of protons or neutrons or other will show spin and are NMR active. Nuclei with even number of protons or neutrons are not NMR active. Example, if they have even number of protons or neutrons in their nucleus, like carbon 12, oxygen 16, they are NMR inactive. The criteria for being NMR active is that it should have odd number of protons or odd number of neutrons or both. Odd number of protons, odd number of neutrons or both. Let's watch a short video on this.
NMR spectroscopy has become one of the most frequently used analytical tools to elucidate chemical structure. It is particularly useful for carbon-based chemical compounds, also known as organic compounds, the molecules that make up all living things, and many substances that we interact with on a daily basis. In this video, we'll take a look at how NMR spectroscopy works and provide a visual metaphor for what is happening at the nuclear level. If we consider a chemical compound, we are particularly interested in what atoms are present and what the arrangement of those atoms are. If we were able to look inside an atom, we'd see a dense and positively charged nucleus. It is the nucleus that NMR spectroscopy detects and gives us a lot of information about the overall structure of the molecule. Here's how it works. Ordinarily, nuclei are oriented randomly, but if we place a sample of a chemical...
Yeah.
Sorry to interrupt you. The video isn't visible.
It's not visible.
Yeah, not visible, ma'am. It's like the slide is going on the proton NMR. Video is not visible.
Video is not visible. I don't understand why it is not visible. It's a very nice video, basically for 5 minutes about NMR.
We can run it again.
I'll run it again. Okay.
to elucidate chemical structure.
Yeah, we are just getting the voice, but the video is not there.
It's also known as organic compounds, the molecules that make up all living things, and many substances that we
Ma'am, you need to stop the screen share of this, I think.
We'll take
1 minute, 1 minute.
1
minute. Let me check.
And provide.
If I stop, then it won't be there. I don't think then I can. Just a minute. Give me 2 minutes. I'll just check.
Okay, ma'am.
Just give me 2 minutes. I'll just check why the video is not working. Just give me 2 minutes.
Madam, if you are having video in your system, so you can play directly with the share screen.
No.
अनम्यूट करो मैडम को, मैडम म्यूट हो गई.
Ma'am, you need to unmute.
Now, can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Frequently used analytical tools to elucidate chemical structure.
Can you now see the video?
Particularly useful for
Yes, ma'am.
carbon
Yes,
Explain.
yes,
Okay.
madam.
organic compounds, the molecules that make up all living things, and many substances that we interact with on a daily basis. In this video, we'll take a look at how NMR spectroscopy works and provide a visual metaphor for what is happening at the nuclear level. If we consider a chemical compound, we are particularly interested in what atoms are present and what the arrangement of those atoms are. If we were able to look inside an atom, we'd see a dense and positively charged nucleus. It is the nucleus that NMR spectroscopy detects and gives us a lot of information about the overall structure of the molecule. Here's how it works. Ordinarily, nuclei are oriented randomly, but if we place a sample of a chemical compound in a strong magnetic field at the heart of the NMR instrument, the nuclei line up like a compass needle aligning in a magnetic field and start to precess like a spinning top as it spins on a table. By convention, the magnetic field, designated B0, is oriented along the z-axis. Different nuclei have different spins, and the ones with spin 1/2 can exist in one of two possible spin states. These include the following atomic isotopes. The hydrogen nucleus, usually referred to as simply the proton, is present in almost all organic compounds and is the one most frequently analyzed by NMR. The precession frequency, or Larmor frequency, is given by the following equation and is dependent on the strength of the magnetic field and the gyromagnetic ratio, which is a constant for a given isotope. If we apply now a short radio frequency pulse, or RF pulse, at right angles to B0, the nuclei will flip down to the XY plane in unison and continue to precess. Let's represent the average magnetic moment of a set of nuclei by this sphere. At equilibrium, the magnetization vector will be aligned along P0 as depicted here. As we've seen, the RF pulse will flip the magnetization vector to the XY plane. The rotating magnetization vector induces a current in a receiver coil. This signal is detected and amplified. We can see that the oscillating signal sweeps out a sine wave with decreasing magnitude as the nucleus realigns with the magnetic field B0. This wave is called the free induction decay, or FID. If each proton sweeps down an FID at the same frequency, then each proton would look identical, and we wouldn't be able to learn anything about the overall structure of the molecule. But here's the key. Each proton is in a unique chemical environment. Let's consider two protons in different parts of the molecule. Each will be exposed to a different magnetic field depending on the electron density distribution. The electron creates its own magnetic field, which opposes the applied magnetic field, B0. A proton with a high electron density around it experiences a lower magnetic field and therefore a lower Larmor frequency. And a proton in an electron-poor environment has a higher frequency. Typically, protons in an electron-rich environment are referred to as shielded, and those in an electron-poor environment are referred to as deshielded. Aromatic rings, such as benzene, can induce their own magnetic fields, which can further modify the magnetic field around the proton. Now, if we pulse these with an RF pulse, we will get two signals in our FID, one oscillating at a high frequency and one oscillating at a low frequency. The FID is a representation of the wave in a time domain. The Fourier transformation mathematically converts this to the frequency domain, which allows for a visual representation in an NMR spectrum, with the shielded protons giving peaks at the right side and the deshielded protons giving peaks on the left side. Let's look at an example. Here's a simple molecule with hydrogens in 5 different electronic environments. Each type of proton will experience slightly different magnetic field strength and will precess at its own frequency, giving 5 overlapping signals in the FID. After Fourier transformation, we will get a spectrum with 5 peaks, each peak representing a proton or set of protons in a particular chemical environment. With this spectrum in hand, we can start to deduce the chemical space around each proton. We have seen that an isolated proton or group of identical protons will give an NMR spectrum with a single peak, known as a singlet. Sometimes we will have protons that are close enough that their magnetic spin states interact, what's known as spin-spin coupling. In this case, the peaks do not appear as a singlet, but rather appear as a split peak, known as a doublet. For example, if proton A has a neighbor, proton B, in a different electronic environment, proton A will be affected by its neighbor. Proton B will either be aligned up or down. Thus, proton A will be a doublet. Likewise, proton B will be split by proton A, and it will be a doublet also. 2 neighboring protons will give a triplet, and 3 neighboring protons will give a quartet. You can even see quintets and septets in some cases. Spin-spin coupling can give us valuable information about the connectivity of the atoms in a molecule because it shows us which protons are close to which other protons. I hope this video has provided some useful images to provide a visual metaphor of how NMR spectroscopy works. As the next step, you may want to focus on the equations that are used to describe the behavior of nuclei in a magnetic field. You may also want to get a deeper understanding of how the NMR spectrum is used to interpret chemical structure, and a lot of that skill will come with practical experience.
Okay, can you see the screen now?
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah. So this was a small representation of how NMR works, and now let's go and let me explain to you. So NMR spectroscopy, NMR depends on the spin of the nucleus under study. That is the magnetovaric ratio. The magnetovaric ratio or the gyromagnetic ratio is different for each type of nucleus and is represented gamma is equal to mu upon rho, where mu is the dipole moment and rho is the angular momentum. So some of the values of some of the magnetovaric ratio values are shown in this table. It depends on the spin of the nucleus under study, and the most common is proton, that is hydrogen. It is, as we all know, so what happens is, this is hydrogen. In this figure, if you see, this is hydrogen, and when a frequency hits this, it starts moving along this axis, that is called as the precessional orbit, and then it goes from a lower energy level to a higher energy level. The lower energy level, let's see in the next slide. These are the spin states. The hydrogen is the hydrogen protons. The protons are in different orientations in the spin state. And when you align or when you apply a magnetic field B0, then what happens is some of them will align with the magnetic field parallel to the magnetic field, and some of them will be anti-parallel to the external magnetic field, how the way it is shown in this figure. And then so let us take this. This is a very simple, let me explain it to you in this way. Like, say this is your proton. A proton is also shown as a vector. So this is your proton, and the proton is kept in an external magnetic field, which is coming from up, going downwards. So, and the proton aligns with the magnetic field. This state is called
Hello, Preeti madam.
Yes, sir.
I think signal is lost.
Dr. Kiran, your
spin
voice
state.
isn't audible.
This is it.
Okay.
Now it's audible.
You need to unmute.
Hello.
Okay. Now,
Okay, ma'am. Now it's clear.
now you can share screen.
Yeah. 1 minute. Okay. Can you see the screen?
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know.
done.
Yeah. So when an external frequency, a radio frequency is applied, what happens is from the low energy, the protons absorb energy and they go to a higher energy, and the spin changes from plus half to minus half. And there is a then when the energy is stopped and these protons come back to their original energy, when they lose the energy, the same amount of energy is given out, which is called as delta E, that is equal to rho h upon 2 pi bo. So let's see the next slide. The shielding and deshielding of protons. Take this example, take this proton. This proton is now put in an external magnetic field, and the proton aligns. There's nothing around it. It's deshielded. There are no electrons around it. It's deshielded, and therefore what happens is it aligns with the magnetic field very easily. In case 2, as we see that this hydrogen or this proton is surrounded by electrons. Now, electrons are charged particles and they have their own magnetic moment. So they create some diamagnetic shielding around the proton. And therefore, when the magnetic field is applied, these protons do not actually align with the external magnet. And then what happens is, then if you have a radio frequency applied on this, so this particular proton is a deshielded proton and this particular proton is a shielded proton. Now we apply energy E1, RF radiation E1 on this proton. Then what happens is, because it is deshielded, the amount of energy required, and it is already aligned with the magnetic field, the amount of energy required for this proton to go to a higher energy level is quite high. And the amount of energy required by this, because this has not aligned itself with the magnetic field, therefore the amount of energy required by this proton is not as high as this. So different amounts of energies are required, and we say that these protons are in different environment, and because of the different environment, the absorption of energy and the giving out of, or the energy which is given out are also different. And therefore what happens is, the amount of energy which is required for a deshielded electron is higher energy, whereas to flip from a lower energy state to a higher energy state, the lower energy state is the alpha spin state and the higher energy state is called as the beta spin state. Whereas if they are shielded, there is a diamagnetic shielding around it, then the energy required to flip from a alpha spin state to a beta spin state is less, and we say that the shielded protons require low energy, and these two protons now will give two different signals, A for the one which is deshielded at a low higher energy, and B for which is shielded at a higher energy. So let's see the next. Let's take an example of chloroethane. In chloroethane, we have two types of protons. The one which are attached to a carbon, which is directly attached to a chlorine, and the second which is a methyl group attached to a carbon atom. So let us mark them as A and B. Now the A protons are deshielded because they are attached to chlorine, and chlorine is highly electronegative. So the electrons around these protons have been pulled by chlorine, making this proton deshielded. And therefore it will show a signal which will be at a higher energy and on the right hand side of the spectrum. Whereas the methyl group, which has now carbon and hydrogen, carbon and hydrogen nearly have the same electronegativity, and therefore, and these protons are attached to this carbon, which is in turn attached to another carbon, and therefore what happens is there is shielding of electrons around this. Therefore the B carbons are shielded and will absorb lower energy and show upfield. Upfield means they will show near the value 0, and this is what is shielding and deshielding. Now how you can use this in interpretation of spectra. Say you have isomers 1-chloropropane and 2-chloropropane, and you don't know, they have just given you the compound and they have told you find out the structure. The mass spectra will give you the molecular formula. The IR spectra shows CH vibrations which are common for two. We can calculate that there is no degree of unsaturation. This data has been given to you and they have told that now you find out which will the compound is which, it is 1-chloro or 2-chloropropane. So only NMR can help us in this way. How it will help us? Let us see this. Say we take 1-chloropropane. There are 3 types of protons in this: A, B and C. The A are the protons which are directly attached to chlorine, and therefore which is an electronegative atom, and therefore it will go downfield, and the energy, the spectra will be shown as you see here. The downfield signals will be shown. Then B is a methyl group which is totally shielded, and therefore a spectra will be a signal will be seen very close to 0 value, and CH2 will show the signal in between the two. So you'll get 3 signals for this compound. And for 2-chloropropane, as we see that 2-chloropropane, there is a we mark the higher proton A which is attached directly to chlorine, and the 2 other, because this has a center of symmetry, the 2 other groups, the methyl groups, are equivalent. They are in the same electronic environment, and therefore they will be marked B, and we'll get only 2 signals for this. The one, the proton which is attached to a carbon, attached to a chlorine, will go downfield, will require more energy, will go downfield, and the other, both the other hydrogens will be seen upfield, and therefore we can interpret the structure, or we can determine the structure of these compounds using NMR spectroscopy. Upfield and downfield signals. Now why these signals arise? So as I've already explained, I will again explain that what is delta E? Delta E is the difference in energy. The difference in energy from when a proton goes from a lower energy state to a higher energy state. It is given by simple h nu, where h is the Planck's constant and nu is equal to rho upon 2 pi B0, where rho is the gyromagnetic ratio and B0 is the magnetic field strength. So if you substitute nu by this, we get the formula delta E is equal to h upon rho gamma 2 pi B0. Now let us take this shielding and de-shielding again. So you have a proton which is shielded with electrons, and when you apply this RF frequency here, because it is shielded, it requires so the total energy required here, if we don't want to use this formula, we can directly calculate like this: effective magnetic field, that is B effective, is equal to B applied minus B local. Now what is B local? B local is the amount of energy which is given by these electrons, the diamagnetic electrons, the electrons which are already there, and therefore the B effective is the applied energy. Applied minus local will give you B effective, and that is going to be a small amount. Whereas if you take a de-shielded nucleus, there is no B local. The B local is totally 0. So the B effective is going to be the B applied, and therefore this energy is going to be high. So what do you understand by this? We understand that if the proton is shielded, the B effective is low, the energy required to go to a beta spin state, that is resonance, is low, and the signal will be shown upfield. If the shielding or the de-shielded, the proton is de-shielded, then the B effective is high, the energy required is high, and therefore the signal will go downfield. So this is how the signal goes downfield. So what are the key points here? The key points is that the nucleus has charge and spin, which can behave like, so it can behave like a magnet. NMR spectroscopy operates by applying a magnetic field to nucleus and then measuring the amount of energy necessary to put various nucleus in resonance with the applied magnetic field. Nucleus in various electronic environments, shielded or de-shielded, require different amount of energies to bring them into resonance. And an NMR spectrum provides a signal or peak representing the energy necessary to bring each nuclei into resonance. So these are the key points what we have learned till now. Now let's go to the next aspect of NMR, that is ability of predicting number of NMR signals by looking at the structure of the molecule. So let's take this example, propane. How many signals do you think this molecule shows? Two signals in NMR spectra. How? So let's take the molecule and see what type of proton does it have. So let's first take a methyl and mark it as A. Then we take the second one, which is not a methyl, a CH2 group, and mark it as B. Now there is another methyl. So what we see that this molecule has a center of symmetry, and therefore this methyl protons will also be A, and therefore it will show only two peaks in or two signals in NMR spectra. Let's go to the next. This will show how many signals. The molecule shows 4 signals. So let's see how. Let's again, there are 3 methyl groups, 1, 2, and 3. So let us see. So let us mark this methyl as A. And this particular molecule has a plane of symmetry. So if this is marked as A, this is also marked as A. The CH proton is marked as B because it is different from methyl protons. The CH2 is marked as C, and this methyl, which is present here, is on the line of symmetry or on the plane of symmetry, and therefore this CH3 is marked as D. So there are 4 types of protons in this particular molecule, and therefore there will be 4 signals which will be observed in the spectra of this molecule. Let's take another example. Now in this example, we have again 3 methyl groups which are attached to a tertiary carbon. We have a CH2 and we have a 4th methyl group. And it is said that this shows 3 signals. Let us see how does it show 3 signals. So if we take this carbon, there is a single bond between this carbon and this carbon. And we all know that single bond have free rotation around their axis. So when we put this molecule in NMR, these particular CH3 groups which are attached to this tertiary carbon, they keep moving, and therefore they are in a exactly same environment, and therefore all the 3 methyl groups are marked as A. Then again, as we have seen, it has got a plane of symmetry, and therefore this methyl group is marked as C and the CH2 is marked as B. So we have basically how many types? We have only 3 types of protons in here, and though there are 4 methyl groups, but the 3 methyl groups are equivalent, and the 4th methyl group is in a different electronic environment or different environment, and therefore we say that there will be only 3 signals observed in the NMR spectra of this particular molecule. Let's take one more example where a double bond comes into picture. Now, if you take ethene and you draw this, you see there is a center of symmetry and a plane of symmetry. Therefore, all the 4 hydrogens in ethene are equivalent. They are in the same atmosphere, same environment, and therefore you will get a single peak, one single peak in NMR spectroscopy for this particular molecule. Let's take now propene. In propene, if we see what happens is, let us mark this methyl group as A. Then there is a center of symmetry. Now we all know that there is no free rotation about a double bond, and therefore this hydrogen is different, and therefore it is marked as B. So all the hydrogens here will be different. Why are they different? Because there is a double bond and there is no free rotation. So this hydrogen is marked B, this is marked C, and this is marked D. Another thing is, when this hydrogen is looked upon, it looks directly, it points to a CH3. This hydrogen also points to a CH3, but then when this looks at, this is a hydrogen, this is a hydrogen, and this looks into, so what basically we have to see that in this molecule, because there is no free rotation, therefore all the 4 groups which are marked will be different, or all the four protons which are attached will be different, and it will show 4 signals in NMR spectrum. Let's take a benzene ring or toluene. We all know that benzene is symmetrical. We all know benzene is symmetrical, and this is the center of symmetry. So methyl group is marked as A. Then if you look at this hydrogen and mark it as B, since it has a center of symmetry, this hydrogen is also marked as B. This is C, and this hydrogen is marked as C. And the hydrogen at the para position is marked as D because it is along the center of symmetry. And therefore it has got 4 different type of protons. And because it has 4 different type of protons, it will show 4 different signals in NMR spectrum. Now, how we use this to interpret the difference? Now, as I told you, if we have isomers like dimethyl cyclopropane, cis 1,2-dimethyl, trans 1,2-dimethyl cyclopropane, and 1,1-dimethyl cyclopropane, how will we distinguish this using NMR techniques? So let us take one at a time and see how we will distinguish this. So let's take 1,1-dimethyl cyclopropane. So the first thing is we will first convert the structure into a tabular form, and then we can see that these atoms or these molecules are seen above the table and these are seen below the table. So this is marked as A. If the methyl group here is marked as A, the molecule has a center of symmetry. The methyl group below will also be marked as A. Similarly, the hydrogen here is marked as B, that is on the 3rd carbon. The hydrogen below will also be marked as B because of the plane of symmetry. And because this hydrogen here is on the carbon number 3 is marked as B, and there is a center of symmetry, even the hydrogen on the carbon atom 2 will be marked as B, and the below hydrogen will be also marked as B. So what we see here is that there are only 2 types of protons, and because there are 2 types of protons, they will show only 2 signals. So 1,1-dimethyl cyclopropane will show only 2 signals in NMR. Let's see cis 1,2-dimethyl cyclopropane. Now cis 1,2-dimethyl cyclopropane, when we convert it into the table, we can see that it has a center of symmetry. And if you look at the first carbon, you have a CH3 which is marked A, and there is a center of symmetry. So the methyl group at carbon 2 is also marked A. Similarly, the hydrogen is marked B and the hydrogen is marked B. Now what happens to the hydrogen at the 3rd carbon, C3? The hydrogens, they are not equivalent to B hydrogens. Why they are not? Because when they see across, they see 2 methyl groups, and therefore they are in different environment and they are marked C. Similarly, the 4th hydrogen, that is the hydrogen which is joined to carbon 3 and is below the plane, is also not an equivalent carbon because when it sees across, it sees 2 hydrogens, and therefore this is marked B. So what happens that cis 1,2-dimethyl cyclopropane is going to show us 4 different signals. The first one, that is 1,1-dimethyl cyclopropane, it showed us 2 signals. Cis 1,2-dimethyl cyclopropane is showing us 4 signals. Now let us see another example, that is trans 1,2-dimethyl cyclopropane. So what happens is, let's take this, convert it into the table form, and what do you observe? You observe at C1 there is a CH3 and at C2 there is a CH3. Now this CH3 looks at, if you see directly, it looks at a hydrogen, and this CH3 also looks at a hydrogen. Okay, this CH3 looks at a hydrogen when it sees at carbon 3 and it sees at carbon 2. Similarly, the CH3, that is the methyl group, at carbon 2 looks at a hydrogen when you look at the carbon 1, and it also looks at the hydrogen when you look at carbon 3, and therefore both are equivalent and they are marked as A. Then when we go to the hydrogen which is on carbon 1 below the plane, it is marked as hydrogen B. Similarly, the one above the plane on carbon 2 is also marked as B because they are equivalent. They look at the same type of molecules or atoms when they look across. And the third type is the one which is at the third carbon. The proton which is at the third carbon is marked as C. It has a plane of symmetry. When this looks here, it looks at a methyl, and this proton also looks at a hydrogen, and you take the one which is below that also looks at a methyl and a hydrogen, and therefore both are equivalent and they are marked as C. So this particular molecule will show us 3 peaks. It will show us 3 peaks. So we can easily now come to the conclusion of interpretation of the structure. Though the molecular formula is the same, the higher frequencies are the same, but the signals in NMR spectra, we can easily discriminate or we can easily interpret the structure of the molecules. So what do we come to a conclusion? That the number of peaks in the NMR spectrum equals the number or type of hydrogen atoms in the molecule. Then we go to something which is called as chemical shift. Now, what do you mean by a chemical shift? A chemical shift is why does a shift take place to a downfield or an upfield. That means the energy required by the proton. So let's take this example which we have done before only. It has 2 types of protons, and the one which is attached to an electronegative atom will show at a downfield, and one which is attached to another carbon which is not electronegative will show upfield. So all these signals are measured, and then the plot is done in delta ppm, which runs from 0 to basically 10, sometimes 12 or 15, maximum 15 ppm. There is always a signal which is seen here, and that is the reference signal of TMS. Now let us see what is TMF. That is the upfield signal. NMR starts with 0 from the right hand side and goes downfield up to 15 ppm. So let us see what is TMS and what is it. The TMS is the most shielded molecule. Why? This is the structure of TMS. It is a silica Si with 4 methyl groups attached to it. All the molecules of hydrogen here are equivalent. It is highly shielded. It is a highly shielded molecule, and hence it is used as a standard or reference molecule in NMR spectroscopy. It shows signals at 0 ppm in the plot. It shows at 0 ppm in the plot. So chemical shifts are always measured with reference to TMS. Okay, so whether it is upfield, so if it is close to TMS, it's called as upfield, and if it is away from TMS, it's called as downfield. How away it is from TMS will give you how downfield it is. So remember, any peak close to TMS is due to shielded protons, because TMS is more shielded. So any peak which is close to TMS will be shielded protons, and the one which goes away from TMS will be de-shielded protons. So if we provide, now let us take this molecule and we provide a sketch of HNMR spectrum of the following molecule. The molecule is nitropropane. It has 3 types of protons. The one which are attached to nitrogen, that is a nitro group, they are marked as A. Then the CH2 protons marked as B, and the CH3 protons marked as C. So let us see which signal will be shown downfield and which signals will be shown upfield. So as the CH2, as the CH2 is joined to a nitro group and nitrogen is electronegative, so the A protons will be shown downfield, followed by B, and then the most shielded are the methyl groups, and therefore they will be shown upfield. or they will be the most closest to the TMS, that is the reference. Let's take the second one. Now in this case, as we see, there are 4 methyl groups, out of which 3 are joined to a tertiary carbon, and as we have seen before, they are equivalent. Why they are equivalent? Because this is a single bond and there is free rotation, and therefore these are equivalent carbons. So the hydrogens attached to the protons attached to these are also equivalent. So they will give you one peak, and there will be one peak downfield of this methyl group because it is joined to, or it is attached directly to a electronegative oxygen atom. And therefore we'll observe only 2 peaks, one of the 3 methyl, that is the A type protons, and the second because downfield because of the B type protons. Let us take the example of this. Now in this case, we have 2 methyl groups. This has a center of symmetry. So these 2 methyl groups are equivalent. Then the CH, obviously this proton is different in a different environment. So it is B, CH2 is different. Now this methyl group, again it's on the plane of symmetry, and therefore this methyl group has a different environment. What we observe here is which peak is going to come downfield, because there is no electronegative atom in this particular molecule, and therefore which peak is going to come downfield and which is going to come upfield. So let us see. Now here, if you remember, or if you see such a figure, you remember only one thing, that in this there is a tertiary carbon, and the proton which is attached to the tertiary carbon will be seen most downfield. Then then will be the secondary carbon, and then will be the primary. So in this case, the proton, that is the B proton, which is a tertiary proton, will be seen downfield. That comes around 1.5. Then comes C, which is a secondary proton, which comes around 1.2. And then A and D protons will be seen at the similar together. You can place anywhere, that will be around 0.085 ppm. Now let us see why a tertiary carbon goes downfield. Though the values here are not very different, they're very close to each other, but still the tertiary proton will be downfield. The most downfield one will be the tertiary proton. Now if you remember all these things, it's very easy for us to interpret. If we get a peak at say such a point, then we can easily interpret the structure that there is a tertiary carbon present in the molecule. So why a tertiary carbon shows a downfield signal? Let us look at this. So if we look at this structure, this is a tertiary carbon. So this proton is attached to a carbon which is again attached to 1, 2, 3, 3 other carbons, and therefore this is a tertiary carbon or a 3-degree hydrogen. Now we say that the electronegativities of hydrogen and carbon are nearly the same, but they're not exactly the same. Carbon is more electronegative, and this hydrogen is now in proximity of 4 carbons, whereas a primary carbon is in proximity of only 2 carbons, and therefore there is more of de-shielding in a tertiary carbon as compared to in a primary carbon, and therefore the signal of primary carbon is upfield and the signal of a tertiary carbon is comparatively downfield. Then what happens? Effect of double bonds on chemical shift, or something called as diamagnetic anisotropy. What we see that if you take this propene, what you observe is that there are 4 types of protons in this, and the proton C shows a peak at around 5.5 parts ppm. Now if I say 5.5, it's really halfway through. If the spectrum runs from 0 to 12 ppm, then 5.5 is nearly halfway through, as compared to A and B protons, A and B type of protons, which come around 4.5, and the D type of protons, which peak around 1.7 ppm. So why this happens? This happens because in molecules like ethene, where there is a pi bond, there are electrons which are there, and these electrons are having their own magnetic field. So and they are charged particles, so they have their own magnetic field, and they are put in an external magnet, what happens is that these alkaline hydrogens create an external magnetic field that is perpendicular to the double bond axis and cause the electrons in the pi bond to enter a circular motion, like what I have shown here in red, this circular motion. Okay. Then what happens? The circular motion actually reinforces the external field at the edge of the double bond on both sides of the pi bond, but creates a local field shown in purple and green that opposes the external field in the center of the double bond. Now, if it is going to oppose the external field, that means more energy will be required to flip these protons, and therefore they show signals downfield. Similarly, if we have this toluene, it is observed that it has two types, this 4 types of protons. That methyl group is, or the A type of protons, they pick up at around 2.3 to 2.5, and all the other protons from, that is B, C, and A, they pick up around 6.5 to 8 ppm. Now this if this type of peaks are seen in a spectra, it indicates that the presence of an aromatic benzene ring in the structure. So why are the benzene hydrogens shifted downfield? So let's see again. So this is the case that if there is, benzene has got resonance. Now because there is resonance, that means these electrons inside are moving. So when they move, they create a magnetic field. And this magnetic field is in the direction of the external magnetic field. And if it is in the direction of the external magnetic field, that means the energy required to flip these protons from a lower energy state to a higher energy state is going to be very high. This phenomena is called as diamagnetic anisotropy. This creates a diamagnet is created in this. What is a diamagnet? One created by the protons, by the electrons of the benzene ring, which is also aligned with the external magnetic field. This is called as, and therefore the B effective increases, and the energy required for the proton to go to a higher energy state is now high, and that's why they show signal downfield. That is why the benzene ring hydrogen show signals downfield. Here also same thing which I have already explained. They are going, this is moving like this, and a diamagnetic anisotropy effect is seen, and the hydrogen peaks at around 4.7 again, which is a very high what to say, the moment downfield signal. Now it is not always true. If you take acetylene, in acetylene what happens is it has a triple bond, but the pi electrons create a magnetic field which is opposing the applied magnetic field. And because it is opposing the applied magnetic field, no diamagnetic anisotropy is seen, and therefore the signals are very close to the TMS. They are at around 2.4 ppm, which is not very high shift. It is very close to the TMS signals. Okay. Now, what are chemical shifts of some protons? If you can see, different NMR works. Now, different NMR works at different frequencies, and hence shift of the peak would be different for same sample in different instruments, and therefore this formula is given, which will convert it into the same PQN. So whether you use a 60 megahertz NMR or you use a 900 megahertz NMR, the peaks are going to come at the same delta ppm. So here if you see, we've given some that CH will come between 0 to 1.5. This is the allylic hydrogen. It peaks around 1.5 to 2.5. The one with the electronegative atom peaks between 2.5 to 4.5. One with the double bond will directly on the carbon attached to the double bond due to magnetic and anisotropy, it will peak around 4.5 to 6.5. This benzene will peak around 6.5 to 8. That is again magnetic. And if you have seen here, when you have an electronegative atom along with the double bond, it goes beyond 9. So these are fixed. These chemical shifts are fixed. The operating frequency of the NMR will not make any change in the delta ppm, in the parts per million or the ppm of the shift. And proximity, so what we come to conclusion from this is proximity to an electronegative atom or a double bond creates the peak to be shifted downfield. So now let's see another phenomenon, that there is a relationship between the area under the peak and the number of hydrogens responsible for them. Now, what do you mean by this? Let's see. So in an NMR spectra, you always observe some peaks are higher and some peaks are lower. So what is basically that? It will never give you such a peak. But if you magnify this, you can see that there is an area under the peak. Now, in this area is directly proportional to the number of protons which are present in the molecule. Okay, for example, A has 2 protons, so it will show you a peak which is related to 2, and B has 3 protons, so it will show you a higher peak. Now this can be easily done, or in the instrument, in the NMR instrument also you can easily see that these types of, they calculate and give you. So if you measure this length, where I have written 2, if you measure this length, this will be for 2 hydrogens, then this will be for 3. This will be equivalent to 3 hydrogens. It will be 3 times. So if you take the ratio of A upon B, it will give you the number of hydrogens which are present in the molecule, and therefore the area under the peak is very, very important, because it gives us the number of hydrogens or the number of protons which are responsible for that particular peak. We come to the next aspect, which is called as splitting of peaks. Peaks can be split due to neighboring or different hydrogens. Neighboring or different hydrogens. Again, we take the same example. We have shown here, this is a diagrammatic representation. You have 2 peaks, but if you magnify these peaks, you will see that the A peak gives you a quadrat. There are 4 peaks which are seen, and the B peak gives you 3 peaks, that is called as a triplet. Now, how do these peaks arise? This is called as multiplicity of peaks, and this usually arises due to a phenomena which is called as spin-spin coupling. And A and B hydrogens are called as coupled protons, and coupled protons show splitting. So let us see in the next slide. This goes with a rule called as n+1 rule. How do you calculate the number of peaks? It goes with a rule which is called as n+1 rule. What is this n+1 rule? Say you take this A protons. A protons are directly attached to a carbon which has got how many protons? 3. So n is equal to 3. The neighboring carbon having how many protons? 3. So n is 3, n+1 becomes 4. That means the A protons will split up to give you a peak like this with 4 signals, and this is called as a quadrat. Similarly, if you go to this B type of protons, they are attached to a carbon which has got how many protons? 2 protons. Therefore, n is equal to 2. n+1 is equal to 3. So it's going to give you a triplet, 3 peaks. Okay, so this is how the splitting takes place. Let's see some more examples. This is a splitting pattern. Now you have CH2. On one side you have a fluorine, on the other side you have a bromine. Both. So let us put this as A protons. Let us put this as B, because their environment is not same. This is highly electronegative. This is also electronegative, but comparatively lesser than fluorine. So next to A, you have B, the carbon which has got 2 protons. Therefore, n is equal to 2. And according to this, you will get a triplet. And similarly, B will also give you a triplet. Now this, as we have seen, that 1, 2, 3, 3 of them are equivalent, so they are marked as A. So we have 2 types of protons here. In 2 types of protons, this CH2 is joined to a carbon which has no protons. Therefore, n is equal to 0, and therefore it will give you a singlet. Similarly, these A protons are also attached to a carbon which have no hydrogens, and therefore n is equal to 0, and that is going to give you a singlet. Again, if we go to this, if you see this, this is two types of protons are there. What are the two types of protons? CH3, and in between you have a CH2. So they are different type of protons. Again, CH3, they are equivalent, and therefore, because the environment around both the methyl groups is same, and therefore they will give you. So both the methyls, next to the methyls, you have a CH2. So N is equal to 2. You will get a triplet for that. But for the B type, you have a neighbor which has 3 protons on one side, 3 protons on the other side. So N is 3 plus 3, which is equal to 6. And therefore, the N plus 1 will be 6 plus 1, which is equal to 7, which is called as a septate, or we can also call it as a multiplet. So it will give you a multiplet. Let's take this example. It's a very particular example in which you have a carbon attached to a fluorine, and on the other side you have a carbon attached to a chlorine. You have 3 types of protons here, A, B and C. For A, you have the proton next, that is the B protons, which are very close to it, and therefore it will show a triplet. Similarly, C will also show a triplet. But now in case of B, as we have seen in the above example, what we saw that we added both the protons. Here, are we going to add? We cannot. Why? Because these protons are in different environments. There is a chlorine attached here and there is a fluorine attached here. So you cannot attach, or you cannot take these as they are in different environments, and therefore N will not be equal to 4. But in this type of protons, the B case, the N plus 1 rule fails, as the hydrogens are not equivalent on both the carbon adjacent to B, and what is expected here is a multiplet is expected, but it may not give you expected 5 peaks, but a multiplet is expected. That is what we know. Similarly, if you take this ethane and both of them, now they are equivalent protons. Because they are equivalent protons, they will not split the signal. You will get only a singlet or a single peak in NMR. So a peak or signal cannot be split by its equivalent. So in this case, it cannot be split. Let's see these 3. Now in this case, the molecule is symmetrical. If you take, it has a center of symmetry like this, and both the hydrogens are therefore, so both will give 1-1 signal, that is a singlet is observed. In this case, there are 2 types of protons. One which is attached to a carbon, which is attached to a bromine, the other which is attached to a, so they will give doublets. 2 doublets are observed. Let's take this. Now in this case, you will see why is this molecule important? This molecule is very important because here you have 2 protons attached to the same carbon. They are not attached to different carbons, but they are attached to the same carbons. But still, we will observe that this hydrogen is attached to a different atmosphere. If you take this plane of symmetry, this has a different environment, and this hydrogen has a different environment. So they are not equivalent, and therefore they will split. And what you will see, like if you take A, there is one hydrogen in B, so N is N plus 1, so 1 plus 1, A will give you a doublet. Similarly, B will also give you a doublet. This type of splitting is called as, or this type of coupling is called as geminal coupling. It is called as geminal coupling. Let us take the example of benzene. In benzene, what happens? If you take this ethyl benzene, these are the A type of protons, B type of protons. So they will have their regular, A type will have 2 plus 1, 3. So this is the 3 peaks which are observed. B will have 3 plus 1, 4. So these are the 4 peaks which are observed. And all other hydrogens are peaked together between 6.5 to 8, indicating very clearly that a benzene ring is present, an aromatic ring is present in the molecule. The other example, the next example is very important, because if we replace the hydrogen at the para position with a methyl group, then what we see is that these signals do not change. This is A, it will show a triplet, the B will show a singlet, the CH3 shows a singlet here, B will show a quadrat, but you in the region of 6.5 to 8, two doublets are seen. Now, if in your spectra you see such two doublets, it very well indicates the presence of a para substitution in benzene ring. It very well indicates the presence of a para substitution in benzene ring. So these small things, the splitting pattern, if we understand properly, and if we know the signal, the ppm at which these patterns will show up, it becomes very easy for us to interpret the spectra. We come to the next, that is called as J coupling. What is J coupling? It comes from the coupling, it's called as coupling constant. Okay, this is called as spin-spin coupling or coupling constant. The nucleus which are bounded to one another could cause an influence on each other's effective magnetic field. So let's take the next slide and see. See here, what is more important here is that the coupling constant or the J values is the distance between these two peaks. Okay, so the distance between these two peaks. These peaks arise due to JAB. That means the influence of B protons on the A electrons. That is what these peaks arise from. So coupling constant or J values measure the distance between the split peaks in hertz. Coupling constant are not dependent on the operating frequencies of the NMR, and they are useful in analysis of complex NMR spectra because protons on identical carbons can be identified by their identical coupling constants. In this, what is there is the distance between these two peaks and these two peaks will be same. That means distance between JAB and distance between JBA are going to be same. These are the peaks which arise due to A, these are the peaks which arise due to B, and the influence of A on B is JAB, and the influence of A on B is JBA. So accordingly, these values will remain constant. Okay, so let us see an example how it is helpful. Now, if we take this structure, coupling constant of trans is always 15 hertz, and that of a cis compound is always 10 hertz. Now, if everything is same, even their NMR spectra sometimes seems to be same, then they help to distinguish between cis and trans molecules. I've given you some values here. If you see this, that alkanes usually show a J value of 7 hertz. So if you have a J value of 7 hertz, you can be very sure that there is a alkane which is present in the structure. Then geminal hydrogens, they show approximate J value at 2 hertz. And if it is this type where there is no coupling which is possible, then there is no J value. So these values are constant, and therefore they can be used just for structural identification. They can be used very easily for structural identification. Therefore, the G values are very important. Now, I think the basic concepts in NMR I have covered, and I have not gone into mathematical calculations because it is not possible to finish in 1 hour's time. And I think with this much knowledge, we can easily interpret the spectras which are there. Let us now just have an overview of what C13 is. Principle of C13 is the same as that of HNMR. Fourier transformer is necessary to create C13 because the abundance of C13 nucleus is very poor, and therefore Fourier transformer is necessary to create C13. It can be run in 3 modes: spin decoupling mode, proton coupled mode, and DEPT mode. The spectra is spread from 0 ppm to 200 ppm. In a proton NMR, in a hydrogen NMR, it is spread from 0 to 15. And in a C13, it is spread from 0 to 200 ppm. Therefore, the spectra is more resolved and no overlapping of peaks take place here. These are the different types of NMR techniques which are available today. A lot of type, a lot of study. NMR itself can be a huge, I suppose, the modules can be really big. Then we come to applications of NMR spectroscopy. So NMR today has a variety of applications, right from chemical synthesis and reaction monitoring, molecular imaging, metabolic profiling, molecular structure and dynamics, molecular interactions, low throughputs, ligand screening, drug drug discovery, agriculture and food industry, polymer and solid materials, synthetic synthesis. So these are the different areas in which NMR can be used. So let's take some of them. I can show you some videos related to this. So medicine and biology, MRI, a multidisciplinary MRI imaging technique for diagnostic purposes, cardiovascular, oncology, neurology, everywhere it is used today. Then metabolomics is the study of active cellular processes through the analysis of small molecular intermediates and end products present within a tissue or cell. Then proton NMR, urinary based metabolic identities, novel biomarkers of acute kidney injury systems. Then drug discovery in NMR tube bioreactors is something which is very new, protein NMR. So let us see a small video on MRI imaging. Let us see a small video on MRI imaging. Stop. Just a minute. Can you see? Can you see?
MRIs use
Done.
protons, which are abundant in the human body,
How to the screen?
creating a small magnetic charge. When a strong magnetic field is introduced, as is the case in an MRI machine, the protons align with that field. The MRI technician then introduces a radio frequency pulse that disrupts the proton and forces it either into a 90-degree or 180-degree realignment.
I can't see. Wait 1 minute.
Push the proton against its native.
Just a minute.
Once this pulse is turned off, the protons
Now can you see?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
realign.
Let me start it again. It's a 2-minute video, a very small video on MRI.
Sure, ma'am.
MRIs use protons, which are abundant in the human body. All protons spin, creating a small magnetic charge. When a strong magnetic field is introduced, as is the case in an MRI machine, the protons align with that field. The MRI technician then introduces a radio frequency pulse that disrupts the proton and forces it either into a 90-degree or 180-degree realignment with the static magnetic field. Since the radio frequency pulse pushed the proton against its nature, once this pulse is turned off, the protons realign with that magnetic field, releasing electromagnetic energy along the way. The MRI is able to detect this energy. They release energy after the pulse is turned off.
So this is how MRI, NMR is used for MRI, and it's the same thing what we have seen for a molecule. Again, a same thing we can see here. I can also show you a small video on protein, how protein
Okay,
can
ma'am.
be mapped with the MRI, this NMR technique. So let us see.
That will be good, ma'am.
One second. And are you seeing the screen?
Yes, ma'am. Okay.
Ma'am, you need to stop the screen. The screen share. Share here.
I think Dr. Kiran ma'am has left. Dr. Kiran ma'am.
Just wait. We are just adding her again. Just give a second.
I think there is a network issue.
Ma'am, you left the group.
No, actually there is some internet connection. Give me 2 minutes, I'll just join back with the hotspot. 2 minutes.
Just give me 2 minutes. She is joining. There is an issue. There is a network issue, so she will definitely join us. So please connect with us. And sorry for the inconvenience.
There was a little problem with the internet.
Yes,
So
ma'am. No
yeah,
issue. No
yeah,
issue, ma'am.
yeah. I will just start again. Okay, so in food industry, so huge application of NMR in food industry. Then
Very nice, ma'am.
these are some case studies.
Yes,
This I got from Resonance. So a lot of analysis, food analysis is done using NMR techniques. And there is a very good video on this also. You want me to show the video? I'll show it. Otherwise,
Can you please go for full screen share?
yeah, I'll do that. Yeah. Do you want me to show the video? I'll show you the video for this also. It's a very nice 3 minutes video for food
Okay.
analysis,
And that
how
will
NMR is used in food analysis and the techniques which are used today. Just a minute.
Problems in food authenticity are increasingly making headlines. With Bruker's fully automated magnetic resonance-based food screener, a tool to ensure the quality of our food conquers the market. Its unique targeted and non-targeted analysis allows the detection of known and even unknown deviations. The whole completely standardized procedure takes a few minutes, starting with sample preparation, leading to the automatic generation of a conclusive report. After filling a tube with a sample, a precise pH adjustment is part of the procedure for wine and honey preparation. Bruker's PT-pH unit was especially developed for small volumes to save time, reduce manual interaction, and to generate precise dilution factors as needed for high-quality quantification. This contributes to highest reproducibility of results, independent of lab, user, and instrument. A straightforward user interface facilitates easy barcoding and bookkeeping, also allowing Excel sheet input. Transferring samples into the auto sampler is straightforward, as the next empty holder is automatically moved to the insert position. From now on, no more manual interaction is needed, independent of the type of sample like wine juice and honey. An application-specific report is generated as the last step in the automatic analysis sequence. In this case, a wine report was generated. It contains the quantification results and statistically derived authenticity parameters, such as geographical origin, grape variety, and vintage year. A comprehensive database of validated samples is used for the result generation. The status of all samples is accessible at any time, also remote through the web. Seamless transition between wine and juice is guaranteed. As part of the sample sequence, a report is automatically generated and contains juice-specific compound quantification and statistical analysis, such as juice variety, fruit content, type of juice, and geographical origin. The differentiation of direct juice and rediluted concentrate is also part of the automatic report. The straightforward usability of the food screener delivers high-quality results with unprecedented reproducibility and transferability over a long time. To provide our customers with analysis results of the highest quality and reliability, Bruker continuously validates the results of analysis performed. An intensive in-house validation is undertaken, as well as successful participation in official and international ring tests. The food screener already received awards for its outstanding innovative properties. NMR has already proven its ability to identify frauds not detectable by other analytical tools and will therefore contribute to a cleaner market. For more information or support, find us at Bruker.com.
So you must have seen how NMR has helped in catching frauds and analyzing the foodstuffs and everything. These are different case studies. This is given in Resonance, the journal Resonance, and they are really good to read. Then in pharmacy, NMR spectroscopy and pharmaceutical impurities. So a wide variety of things can be done using NMR spectroscopy. Again, this is chemistry and physics to determine molecular structures of different chemical compounds and polymers, including polymers, identifying products of chemical reactions, means to study dynamic kinetics and thermodynamics of a reaction. Used in petrochemical industry, the graph or the spectra which is given here is of crude oil. So the different ingredients in the crude oil can be easily mapped by using these techniques, IR, NMR, and Raman spectroscopy. It can also be used in nuclear physics. Actually, it started with nuclear physics, material science, gemology, soil analysis. There is no end to the applications of NMR. So I would end my talk by NMR is one of the best technologies today used in a variety of areas. It is still magic, even if you know how it is done, is what I also feel. Thank you very much. Any questions?
Thank you so much, ma'am. On behalf of Result Society, I got an opportunity to extend hearty thanks to you for such nice presentation, and we got the chance to hear your session. And this will surely be going to encourage us in our future events. Your session enlightened our minds and have shown a new path. Ma'am, please accept the token of remembrance from our side.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
And thanks for gracing the advanced training program and sharing your knowledge with us. And I would like to thanks to all the participants to being in a session. And now I would like to invite Professor Preeti Tagore, President, Frizzle Society for questioning round. Preeti, ma'am. Hi, ma'am. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you?
Yeah, I'm okay. Just I have to go to the doctor, so I was a little bit engaged over there. But like, really, it's enlightening for us. Like, your talk is very much impressive, and hope audience will learn so much things from that. Since you have covered all the aspects and what are the hurdles and uh, what are like applications by practical approaches, each and everything you have covered in your session. And as we know that NMR has become an indispensable analysis tool in cutting edge science and technology field application. So that aspect is also covered by you. Whatever the parameters, the protein shielding, de-shielding, everything goes covered in this session. And we really like getting very much questions from the audience also, and they are just writing they you really learn something from this session. And with this word, just I summarize some of the questions that I have received. That somebody has asked me, could NMR spectroscopy distinguish COVID-19 patients?
Uh, See, there will be they have to do studies, because see, they basically in MRI what they do is they go to the tissues. So I really don't know, because I am not from medical field. I am a chemistry person. So how much they will be in a position to do? Yes, but they have a lot of they can diagnose many of the I should say diseases, like cancer is detected at the level tissue levels and all. So if I think if it is applied, it should be,
because
it should be.
because we saw that the many studies has showed that this NMR the ability of NMR spectroscopy to distinguish TB patients also. So
Yeah, yeah.
might be it's
Oncology, neurology, oncology
all
is
these fields.
cancer, neurology is there, then even cardiac MRIs are possible. So MRI is a tool basically, and if it is used in a proper way, I'm very sure they can identify, or they can detect, diagnose the disease very well. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. One question has been asked by uh, Dr. Mohsin Bano. She's from Saudi Arab. She has asked, ma'am, can you please elaborate on the application of NMR in food industry? You already told us.
Yeah, I have actually, if you go and just Google out food industry, you will get many applications in food industry, because it's everywhere. It is there right from seeds, analysis of seeds, because biotechnology in biotech, there are really, I mean, they have really using NMR as a tool, even for the germinating seeds, to see the quality, to improve the quality. NMR is used as a tool, the purity of the uh, I mean, say the
Purity of the compounds and the
yeah,
pharmaceuticals
everything.
in
So
everywhere. That will
yes,
be everywhere.
there's a huge scope for food industry. NMR has a huge scope in food industry.
Uh, like Dr. Sangadeep Gajvia has asked the question. Just I'm catching. Uh, can magnetic drift affect the NMR pattern? MMR.
MMR, I mean, magnetic drift. What pattern exactly? I didn't get
Maybe
the
it's
question.
NMR. It's NMR pattern. There is
Magnetic
a
drift.
typography.
Obviously, I mean, the magnet drifts for in what? They're asking about a compound, or they're asking about MRI. What? In what?
Dr. Sangeet, can you please unmute yourself if you want to answer of your question? You can ask directly. He wanted to know that NMR changes in magnetic shift or drift.
Magnetic drift, NMR changes in magnetic drift means you're talking about the chemical shifts. Can you unmute yourself and ask? That'll be a better thing.
That will be good. Dr. Sandeep, you can unmute.
Chemical
Yes,
shifts.
chemical shift.
Chemical shifts. NMR and chemical shifts.
Yes, chemical shift.
So what exactly you want me, what you're asking exact question? Can I know the question again, please?
Dr. Sandeep, you can unmute yourself.
Change in the magnetic shift or drift can change NMR pattern.
No, the
Or
magnetic shifts are usually fixed. They don't change the NMR pattern. They don't change. Yeah.
Okay, that's what I'm asking.
Yeah, they are not. They will not change the pattern.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you, thank you, ma'am. Thank you, Priti ma'am.
Yeah.
Thank you, Dr. Sandeep. And one question I have just received that by Dr. Sunil Singh. What is the best choice to normalize serum samples to be analyzed by metabolomic approaches using NMR?
I will have to look into it because I'm not into, as I told you, I'm a pure chemist. So if you ask me chemistry questions, that'll be much more better. You can send me the question, you can mail me the question.
Yeah,
I will 100% answer you the question.
I will
100% answer you.
all that questions and whatever the queries they have, we can discuss later.
Yeah.
And
I have given you my mail ID also in the slide. My mail ID was there. If they want, they can directly also send. You can also send me. I have no problem. I will 100% answer your questions. Yeah.
Thank you so much once again, ma'am, to joining us in a advanced training program of chemistry module. And what message? Last, I just wanted to know what message you wanted to give to all the participants, those who are connected in each and every platform of PRISM.
See, the message here I want to give is, see, now with the changing situations of COVID-19 and after this, online teaching is going to be very important, but we have to make it interesting and very, very lucid for the students, because when you are in a classroom, the student can ask you a question directly and you can, interact with the students very well and explain on a topic, because looking at their faces, looking at their eyes, you can understand whether the student has understood or no. 30 years in this profession, and I'm very sure the moment I look at the student, I know whether he has understood what I've been teaching, and I make it very, I go to a level where he can understand the best. But with the online teaching, the problem is that you can't see all the students at a time. You are sharing your screen, you can hardly see students, and even if they ask questions, you're answering. But what I would say, but still we have to move on. We have to move on with technology. So let us make our lectures interesting and very, very easy, very, very easy, so that if the basic thing is understood by the student, he will get interested in the topic and he will 100%, then we can show a path to him where to go. That's
exactly. With only with this motto and keep in this mind, we have planned the various sessions, like whatever the audience will be connected through the sessions, they learn something. So that is the main objective. We have to go with the technology that is very much required, and we need to keep our session like interactive one. One should not get bored.
Yeah, that is true. That is really true. That's why I try to put videos, so that it breaks the monotony and it creates little interest. There's some change in the participation. And one more thing,
that's really very much required, because through the videos and animated part, we are just we can enhance our learning skills. Like we are more concentrated on your lecture. Somebody has on Facebook also, they are just writing. It's like very nice and nicely drafted presentation, and very nicely you have covered all the parts. So thank you so much once again. And with these words, we can conclude our today's session. And I would like to thanks to all the participants for sparing your time with this 4 days advanced training program. And since today I didn't able to moderate the program from the starting, so Dr. Pooja has taken, because I'm not well. Right now I also go for the hospital. I have my appointment, and the certificates of this advanced training program will be issued within 2 or 3 days. And thank you so much to be connected with this ATP programs. In the morning also you have connected in LCMS part yesterday, or ma'am, from last like 4 days, it's covered 4 days. Everyone is connected, whether it's not like only this Zoom they are connected, they are just on the Facebook also, and there are 300 participants, they are in the YouTube also, because it's like their choice. When they got the like time, so they go for the recording sessions, they go for the watch party on social media. So through that way the session will be approachable to each and every participants, and it's really a privilege that this platform has been utilized by all. Thank you so much. With this word I can conclude my this ATP session. And definitely, as I told you that we have covered the novel drug delivery system approaches in a first module, and this is our chemistry second module. Now maybe 2 or 3 days break, we'll go with the biotech module. Then that's enough, I think.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving this opportunity to present myself. And I hope everybody must have gained something and enjoyed my lecture.
Yeah,
So,
definitely.
thank you. Thank you so much. And
thank you, ma'am. Bye
keep in
bye.
touch. Bye. Take care of your health.
Thank
Health
you.
first. And then
Bye
everything
bye
else.
all. Thank you.
Okay, bye. Good night.
Good night, ma'am. Bye bye. Thanks, Neeraj ji. Thanks, Rajesh ji. Thank you. Thanks, Dr. Nazar. Thanks, Kusuma ji. Thanks to each and everyone. Thank you so much. Yeah, I take care myself. Thank you.